Everybody till this point. We've already had 2 talks. And we did that.
Oh. Yeah, I understand.
All right, so if your badge wasn't working, I think it physically needs to be taken to Rock in some special magical pixie dust process. So if he hasn't come around to do that with your card yet, seek out Rock, email him that you're here now.
I'll make sure he's here too.
Great. So that way you'll be able to use the handy dandy check-in system. Okay. So I see a couple guests. Welcome. We're glad to have you here at FIEA. Thanks for coming down. If you have any questions about FIEA or what we do and so forth, obviously there's plenty of students you can talk to, but please come talk to me as well. I'm the faculty over here. Joe as well. Chris. Plenty of people we can introduce you to if you have specific questions about our curriculum and classes and all of that. So today we have Daniel Harrison. Daniel Harrison is over at Naughty Dog right now. He's a game designer over there, typically doing a lot of system design these days, but he's also done a lot of tech design and scripting and gameplay stuff as well on multiple Uncharted titles. And so, and Last of Us 2, right?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. So he's been doing plenty of great work with Naughty Dog. He's cohort, I'm gonna say 10.
Got it.
I got it.
You almost were wrong.
I was almost wrong.
Second guess.
I'm usually almost wrong. So cohort 10. So he's pretty recent out of FIEA. He started at Tiburon and he later went to Naughty Dog. And something that's interesting to me about Daniel, well, there's a number of things. One of the things is that early on when he was here at FIEA, I was asking for volunteers to help out to volunteer at a high school where we were trying to help them learn Unity and so forth. And Daniel volunteered and was very eager to, and they loved him over there. I'm like, oh wow, this is a really nice guy. If he's as talented as he is nice, then he'll do well. And that turned out to be the case. So he is as talented as he is a genuinely nice guy. So that's always a great combination. So you should aspire to be the same, both really skilled and also really nice. So with that, I'm sure you will enjoy hearing from Daniel now instead of me. So please join me in welcoming Daniel.
Thanks, Ron. That was really sweet. I'm like a little flustered. So we'll just start. I'm Daniel, and I'm a designer. Preface to all of this is that I'm just a man, and I was in your shoes like 3 years ago. So I don't particularly want or deserve to be put on too much of a pedestal. So with that, I'm going to talk about these things. I'm going to talk about what my education was. I'm going to talk about where I've worked, what I've learned there, how I think you can treat FIEA well and get a lot out of it, and along the way there'll be some more stories and it'll be a little jumbled up. But as I said, oh no, my slides are out of the order that I remember them. But I like things to be interactive because I've also been in your shoes more recently enough to remember that like walls of text and pictures and just like a droning voice for an hour and a half or an hour, or however long it ends up being, is tiring. And I tend to forget my questions by the end, or it's like doesn't feel relevant anymore. So if you have a question, like wait 15 seconds to make sure I'm not about to answer it, but otherwise like just shoot up a hand and I'll pause. We'll do it that way. I double majored in undergraduate in psychology and computer science. I did that because just in case I ever wanted to not do games, they both seemed like they'd stay relevant. And also I just think they're both interesting. I actually didn't want to program at all. When I went into computer science, I'd taken one programming class in high school and was like, this is terrible. No one should want to do this. Because we learned Pascal and I just wasn't into it. And I was like, but it's a weird, like it's another language to speak with a programmer, and I want to at least be able to speak their language so I can talk to them about ideas. And then turns out I liked it. And then I came here, stroke of luck that I went to UCF, and then UCF has this amazing grad program, as you all know, and so I was a designer here. In undergrad, I worked at Lockheed Martin, and then out of here, I interned and then worked as a contractor at EA Tiburon, and then somehow I moved from there to Naughty Dog. So, as I said, I worked at Lockheed Martin. I can't actually talk about anything I did because it's a defense contractor, but I was a programmer. I worked in C# and C++, mostly C++, a little bit of like web dev stuff with CSS and that sort of thing, but I have to immediately move on or someone will shoot me. Immediately out of in my last semester, in fact, I worked at EA Tiburon. This is their delightfully cheesy old logo. I don't know if you can tell because I chose a terrible image, but this is a football and a shark, which is very clever. I worked on Rory McIlroy's PGA Tour, which is pretty cool and was very fun to work on. It's also a very long name. I was a scripter there. I worked in their proprietary engine, which is kind of like Unity 4's Blueprint visual scripting system, which was really cool, partially because we got to like change the engine ourselves. It was still, and I think it's still a developing engine as most of them are, but we could like make our own entities. I see a question. Name.
Hi. I haven't I haven't gotten that game. Is that actually in the game? That space level in this?
This is my level. This is the Grand Canyon, and this is a challenge that I'm actually super proud of because I'll just talk about it now. So in this specific PGA Tour, there was something we ended up calling the Night Club, because puns. And thank you. It's a slow burner. And it was essentially like arcade mode, right? You had like these weird powers that you could unlock, these boosters, and they took some energy, and you had a limited amount of energy, and then, but we had a lot of freedom in the scripting language to make stuff happen, make gameplay happen from them. So you had things like sticky ball, so like the next thing the ball hit, it would just stick to it, would stop rolling, like done. Or like super bouncy ball, which it would like ice over, and it would ricochet like off of stone or ice. Remote control, self-explanatory. Rocket and Nitro, I think is what they were called. One shot you straight up, but kept all your other forward, like other velocities, but it added a lot of upward velocity, and the other one added like a continuous forward acceleration. And so one day I was goofing off, and I gave myself unlimited energy, rocket, nitro, and remote control, and I found that you could just fly the ball around the whole course. And so that's where this challenge type was born. We had a couple in the game. This was one of the biggest ones because the Grand Canyon is a huge level. It's all par fives. And yeah, you just had to fly around, and you had a limited amount of energy, and you had to get through these hoops, and that would refill your energy. And so it was kind of like that old like Star Fox, like get through the rings time challenge that just kind of happened organically, which was cool. Maybe later, because I don't want to spend too much time on this. If you'd like, I can tell you about like how we got to this point, because it started as something very different and vastly differently designed, and we iterated towards it. But anyway, yeah, so I was on the Grand Canyon. I was also on career mode, which was cool. I got to do some like neat things with like dynamic story. But that's what I did working for the man at EA. And then I started working for Naughty Dog. I started on Uncharted 4, where I took Scotland was my level for anybody who worked in Scotland, and I got to work on the final boss, actually. That was really exciting, and came in like meteorically at the very end. And then I jumped onto Uncharted Lost Legacy when that finished up, and I was on the very first level, the like city level, as well as, for anybody who's played it, the lockpick mechanic was my baby. So that's what I worked on there. There are a lot of differences between these two companies, as you might expect, or maybe not. And I would talk to them if I could click my notes better over here. Cool. Okay. The biggest difference is their management structure is vastly different. Like the way they think about project management. EA is very, it's like has a lot more of a hierarchy. It has a lot more focus on very precise time management and time predictions. So like I think it was weekly, maybe it's every other week. We would get together and we'd look at all the new tasks we got, and people would be like, that's a 10-hour task, that's a 20-hour task, that's a 5-hour task, that's a 1-hour task. They'd all go in there. And we actually have this interesting thing that we do. I forget what it's called offhand, but it's essentially you're like, everyone would pick an amount of hours vaguely, like high level, like 1, 10, 50, 100 or something like crazy like that, and they would all like pick secretly how long they thought that task that was going to take, and like everyone did it for everyone's task, so it was like accountability. And then you'd all flip at the same time, and so if everyone was like, oh, that's an 8-hour task, then be like, cool, it's an 8-hour task. But if one person was like, it's a 2-hour task, and they were the person doing it, and everyone else was like, no, that's a 20-hour task, then we could like talk about why everyone else disagreed, or why this person, because maybe this person knows it's easy because of A, but everybody else doesn't know that, or vice versa. Maybe this person's underestimating. So that was cool. And actually, I thought that was pretty wise way of making sure that you're kind of hive-minding the experience of knowing how long things take to do. EA has a bunch of producers. It's got of various types and a bunch of leads of areas, and they all kind of report to the DD. And there's a lot, like if you want to change anything in the schedule, you can do that sometimes, but you have to like talk to the DD, make sure they're all in the loop. And that's good because that means that they can look at the schedule and be like, well, we're releasing on this day. Everything past this moment is cut, right? Effectively, because you know you're not going to get to it. And so that's cool, and especially important for Tiburon's types of games where they really must hit their deadline. Naughty Dog is the exact opposite. Naughty Dog has one producer in the whole company, and she sets kind of like, she's amazing, but she sets kind of like this super high level schedule, like we're gonna release sometime in this year. And it gets more fine-tuned because marketing needs it as you get closer. And then a lot of the making sure things get done on time and well is personal accountability. There's so much personal accountability and responsibility at Naughty Dog. Like you own your area, you talk to the people you need to talk to. If someone is blocked by something you need to do, you do it for them as soon as you can. And that's really cool too. It's kind of like FIEA in a lot of ways, where the culture at Naughty Dog is you get up and you go and you talk to this person and you get the stuff done that you need to get done, and it's kind of organic that way. Which works because everyone's really good at understanding how long things take and also what things are needed. So people are really good at, like, when you ask them for this small thing of seeing that it's actually a big thing, or vice versa, or coming up with a better way of doing it to make sure we make a good game and make it relatively on time. The size of the companies are obviously vastly different. Naughty Dog is a Sony first-party studio, but EA is this whole publisher, right? And Tiburon is a massive company. Tiburon owns, last I was there, this whole building, like top floor. I think Madden had like 2.5 floors. There's so many people. Our golf was actually the smallest team at 60, is I think about what we peaked at. And that we were like the baby. We had like, this little tiny little bit on one of the floors, and then like the rest of the floor and the next one was NBA, and then like 3 floors were Madden of different types. There was like Madden Mobile, and they took up some space, and so it was like huge. Versus Naughty Dog takes up 1 floor of one office building and like isn't always filled to overflowing, and that changes the culture a bit. Partially, we all tend to work on one game at a time, unless like some small contingent's prototyping the next game or figuring some things out. So when you work at a company that like you're one of the games they make, that means there's got to be even more hierarchy, because there's the leads and creative directors of your teams, but there's also the same of the other teams, and there's people they report to, and crosstalk between them, and it's like a lot more management, which is a big deal. Why I think Tiburon has that kind of difference of management structure, and that the more structures, they've also got so many more people, versus we don't need as much of it because there's not so much to manage. As far as like perks and things like that, they're pretty much the same, so I'm going to skip over that thought. In case you were curious though, pretty much anywhere you work, you get perks that are related to the place you work, and since this is a Sony first-party studio and EA is huge, you get like access to games and stuff that are cheap, that you make, that your company makes. Obviously the types of projects are vastly different. Tiburon makes sports games, pretty much has for a very long time, versus Naughty Dog makes all these very narrative-driven games, and I know people who prefer one or the other, but I will caution you to think that no matter which one you prefer, you'll probably enjoy doing your job at any of them, because hopefully you enjoy your job. And if you don't think you would enjoy doing your job on a game you're less thrilled about, then think harder about like what your niche is, because maybe you need to figure out a better one that just fuels you for the sake of itself. I ended up loving working on golf, even though I don't golf. I've golfed like 8 times in my life, and I'm like not good at it at all. And I don't like know a lot of golf. I don't know any golfers. I don't know a lot of golf jargon, but I loved working on golf because we had the tools to be creative and come up with crazy modes and do these things. And so, yeah, that's all I have to say about the types of their projects. The only other differences really are mostly in their like tools. So they both use proprietary engines. Frostbite is what we used on golf, and at Naughty Dog we use something called Charter, which I believe was invented for Uncharted. You can see our naming scheme. We have other tools like Tasker to keep track of our tasks, and Surfer for our surfaces and textures, and we're very creative. Yeah, you can tell. But it's cool because like Charter was made for Uncharted, and so it's hyper specialized. Like I don't think we could make golf very easily in Charter, and I don't think that Frostbite would struggle to make Uncharted because they just have very different needs, and that's cool. The visual scripting in Frostbite versus like we use something called Scheme, which is like Lisp. And if you haven't ever even seen Lisp, Lisp is the craziest language you've ever seen as a language. It's all parentheses. Like I've ended a line with 7 parentheses and be like, all right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I missed one, but should it be here or should it be here or should it be here? Like what did I? And so structure becomes very important. I see a question, name, and then question. Jirodi. Jirori.
Yes.
That's a cool name. I like it.
How do you, just in your experience, when you move from one company with using vastly different engines and stuff, how long does that transition usually take you to like pick up on some of these new technologies?
I think it depends on obviously how much you use it. So if I was a different type of designer, I might not use these languages or certain tools. But so if you're using it a lot, and in my experience, for me at least, if I'm doing something that actually is a real task, then I learn I'm pretty comfortable within a month. I think for languages, it's all syntax. Like syntax is weird, but once you understand how to program, you can pretty much transfer that thought, and you're just like, oh no, this is how you end a line in this language, and you're like, okay, cool, remap, done. As far as the engine, I think it's a continual process of learning. Something else that's very different is between these two companies is documentation. At EA, like everything was documented on a wiki, or there was a spreadsheet for it, or everything was written down because it had to get like approved. At Naughty Dog, we just do things. And so super often, like if I can't find a well-commented function that's what I need, or I can't find the object in our engine that I need to drop in, I'll just like pop over the fence and be like, hey, does anybody know if we can do this? And somebody will tell me. Or like, oh, I saw you do this thing with AI like a month ago. How did you do that? Or you seem like the type of person who knows how to do this with animations. What's that called again? And so there's a lot more like just asking people. It's very common that somebody will be like, will pull your attention away for like a second. So you get really good at like refocusing. Although I know there's like the psychology that like if you interrupt someone or if you get interrupted, it takes 30 minutes to get back into full gear. I no longer believe that's true. It's semi-true. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Cool. Well, I kind of just accidentally talked about most of these things. So, I guess the last thing is, last two things is communication, which obviously I've mentioned a lot in Naughty Dog. Very free form. A lot of times you call someone if you don't want to walk all the way over to them, otherwise you just walk over to them. And if you need to hit a lot of people, that's when you email. Versus like a lot of things wanted to be an email at Tiburon because again, they like tracking things. They liked, my DD would often, when I told him, hey, we want to do this thing, he'd be like, just give me the group email, like just forward that to me and I'll look at it myself on my own time kind of thing. So a lot more like written versus oral, which is another difference, which is pretty cool. I'm now going to talk about you, or at least where I was when I was you. And everyone has a massively different experience, so all the grains of salt here. Because I know people from my cohort, which is obviously going to be different compositionally from your cohort, who like had different experiences and learned different things, and we learn from each other by sharing those things. But sometimes people are like, nah, you're wrong, and so sometimes I'm wrong. So there you go. There's your caveat. I was the project lead of a game called Rotten Fruit, one of our capstones, and it got cut. So there's your setting. It got cut because I did poorly. Not that I'm blaming it all on me, but I did a couple things really badly. The biggest thing that I hit myself about is that I had the knowledge, because it had been said to do it, but also kind of the instinct to talk to everyone on my team and find out, do you like what you're doing? Do you want to be doing what you're doing? Is what you're doing useful to you? Can you see it being useful to you and getting a job, learning the skills you need to learn, etc.? And I just never did, because in my head it was this big deal that I was going to have to spend like 3 hours a week talking to people, and I need to get things done too, right? But also, like, I don't want to bother people. They always seem busy. But I should have just been like, whenever I saw someone, be like, hey, you got a second? And just pull people off into a room and be like, it could be 60 seconds. Like, is everything good? Because maybe everything's good. But I found out that my entire programming team, because I was kind of messing with their work schedule and like not giving them the right things to do, they all wanted to leave, which is like heart-wrenching when you're a project lead and you find out that you never knew for months that your entire programming team was like ready to jump ship, which is a failure of communication on my part, because we're all going to mess up. Like, whether I gave them good things to do or not is semi-irrelevant, because if I talked to them and cared enough to be an imposition and risked that socially, risked annoying them, then I would have known months in advance that I was doing something wrong and I could have corrected it. So like, be less afraid of talking to people than messing up, because you're gonna mess up every time. I see you. But you can fix it, but not if you don't know. And this goes for leads, but it also goes for non-leads. Like, if you think something's expected of you or you're not sure what's expected of you, just ask. And like, that's a dialogue. It's not like they don't have to throw it down from on high, be very giving and forgiving to each other, but it can be awkward, but do it. Yes, name and question. Joe?
Yeah, my
Hi, Joe.
question is that I didn't really get you. Do you mean that you care your teammate too much, so that kind of make a problem, or sorry, I didn't get the point.
Oh, the point of this? So I was afraid that if I asked people to take time to talk to me about how they're feeling about the project and if they're happy, that I would be annoying them. I thought that if I called them into a room as their project lead and said, how's everything going?
Is that you do that too often?
I didn't do it at all.
Oh, okay.
I didn't do that. I should have done that. I just failed to. And because of that, I didn't know that I had a mutiny.
Now I can say.
Yeah, cool. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that. This is super cheesy, but treasure your love. You guys get this really cool chance. Some of my best friends came out of this program, and even like sometimes not in the year that I was here, but just talking to people who came before me or after me, like about the program, and you get a lot of cool chances to bond. For me, one of the best chances to bond, because obviously everyone bonds in the trenches when you're working till 1 a.m. every night for a week to get some deadline in, and it still doesn't work, and someone stays up the night before to make it function, and it just barely makes it. Like, that's a great bonding experience. But also, like, the small things, like eating lunch together. I really super bonded with, a couple of us loved improv so much that we just kept doing it after we didn't have to anymore. Once a week, once every other week, when things got really hectic, Ron would even join us sometimes, some of the other faculty, Sarah, and it was a blast. And it took an hour out of our every other week. It's not a lot of time, but it was very worth it for de-stress. But it also let you like poke fun at like the world and each other and yourselves, and be silly and get out of your own head. And that's why some of those people I'm so close with, because we took that little bit of time to just enjoy each other and then go back into it. So take the time. Don't get too wrapped up, even when you're focused. Make sure the work you're doing is relevant. I know people who, when I'm talking a lot from a designer, but I'll try to be agnostic here. As a designer in Gauntlet, they were put on a part of their Gauntlet that like didn't really serve them. It wasn't what they wanted to be doing, but it was like needed for the Gauntlet. And that's negotiable. Like, you should be doing something as much as possible that's helpful to you. If you're an artist, don't get stuck doing the grunt work because you're willing to. Like, don't do that to yourself. That stuff should be spread out, because everyone should have something that they can walk away from every project with going, I can show this off and get hired, or at least closer to hired, because of this is part of my portfolio. This is part of what I've done. I can tell the story of this thing that I helped make. So, and if you're a lead in any capacity ever, watch out for someone who's just being too nice and doing too much of the stuff that's not what they want to be doing in life. It's part of the first point, is if you're talking to people, finding out, hey, is what you're doing useful to you? Also answer honestly so that everyone can graduate and get a job. Obviously put your all into it. The thought here was, I know some people who felt like they had to have a part-time job, I think partially out of habit. And like, that happens sometimes, you really need it financially, but if you can swing not doing that and just be here more, like, this is so expensive already that you might as well give all of you to it, because if you go 75% because you have this other external thing that you don't really need to be doing, like you can get so much more out of this. It will serve you, it will be worth more monetarily even than having a part-time job, for instance. Because some people in our cohort did and eventually realized that they had to quit those things because they were effectively wasting their time here, because it's that last 10% that makes all the difference. Really love each other. Love each other. Be excellent to each other. And party on, dudes. Be sincere. Like, find the good in each other. Like, give each other the benefit of the doubt. When someone's being a punk, just like talk to them kindly and tell them that they're being a punk. And when somebody tells you you're being a punk, which will happen probably to everyone if you're talking well, if you're communicating well, like, receive that and try and figure out why, and don't take it personally, because we're all trying to get a lot out of this in a very short amount of time. It's hard to do. So you can go nuclear if you don't remember that we're all just humans. And this is kind of like the do relevant work part. Everyone's going to have to do some grunt work, something that they're not going to talk about in an interview, they're not going to put on their resume or their portfolio, but the things you should make sure you're getting done are the things that are actually useful to you, because FIEA is fun and FIEA is great. But ultimately, we go to grad school so we can like get a better job faster and be worthy of that job. And so make sure you're doing the things that are relevant as much as possible before you do a breadth of things. So like I know artists have the biggest struggle here, especially because they put you in and they're like, cool, you can do 3D art and 2D art and concept art and tech art and all these other things and shaders and effects. You can do all the things, and you're like, okay, cool, I will. And that's probably a bad idea. Probably you should get really good at one or two things before you say, oh yeah, and this is the other things that I kind of know how to do. I'm aware of them. I practice them some. Because being kind of good at a lot of things is not going to get you as many jobs as being really good at the thing they want you to do in that job, like one thing, which is more common. And for the love of God, tailor your resume to everywhere you apply. Even if it's just reordering the things in your resume so that, like, if you're going to a company that does 2D work for artists, you put the 2D game first. Or if you're applying to a level design thing, put the things that you did level design first. Like, make it easy on them, because the point of the resume is not to get you hired, it's to get you an interview. And like a lot of people are just HR, or they're just scanning through like 50 resumes. And how much would you like to scan through 50 resumes? The first things are the things they're going to see the most. And if they're not relevant, they're going to start drowning you out, or they might just chuck it because they've got other people to look at. So even just doing that goes a long way. So that's it for advice at FIEA and coming out of FIEA. This is what I learned while at EA. And if you'll just give me just a second. Any questions from all of that? Concerns? Thoughts? Feelings? No? Okay. As I said, EA has this whole management structure thing going on. And I, coming out of FIEA, was used to the Wild West, where we have some structure here, but mostly you're doing like what you need, what you want, and changing things willy-nilly. I got in trouble so many times, more times than I was comfortable with, for like walking over to someone who, like, we had a cool idea and I wanted to see if this artist could make something for me. And that artist was like, sure, cool, assuming that I'd done the groundwork and like talked to the DD and made sure everything was like kosher to do. So I got called into an office several times that was like, at the very least, you need to tell us what you're doing. So whatever your management structure is, you should respect it, which means communicating to the right people. It means not going over and around people. It will save you from headaches. I always think over communication is better than under communication. Again, with the DD, for instance, telling him more than he needs to know made him happier than telling him less. But also, there's a lot of things can slip through the cracks when you assume people heard of that thing or were really fully paying attention in your stand-ups that morning. Because stand-ups every morning, I mean, come on. Who can pay attention all the time? So if some person really needs to know something and you're expecting something from them, like, make sure they heard you and they respond, and like go talk to them later. It's better to be a little annoying than to like be waiting for a week on something that someone doesn't even know you need from them. It's not even in their headspace. Fight for your feature. Fight for the thing that you think is really going to make the game. Like, be reasonable, don't be belligerent. But in career mode, we had this system that we ended up with for dynamic stories. So you'd get these news snippets, like based on your progress in the game and like who you beat and who you didn't beat and how well you did. And it would create these like news headlines that were like about you, and like we'd have other golfers talking about you who like you beat or didn't beat and by how much, and they'd like reference that stuff. And it was a lot of like data-driven smoke and mirrors. It took a long time of arguing to settle on that, and a lot of people wanted a very different version of that system, something much safer, something that would much less likely read dumbly. Because if you're trying to composite a sentence out of like snippets of a sentence, like that can very quickly, anybody who's seen text generation or like a bot can very obviously be like, well, that's generated, and no one talks like that. And so I had to fight really hard, and I'm glad I did for what we ended up with, because we ended up with something that was kind of a middle ground. But that was like an interesting talking point, for instance, even in my story with Naughty Dog. And if it had been the like safer version of that, who knows what would have happened? Certainly I wouldn't have been as proud to talk about it, because it would have been this very safe, like always the stories are the same sort of thing. And so fight for your feature when it really matters to you and when it's really passionate, and be willing to prove it. Because it's one thing to say, no, this is going to be really great, but the faster you can prove that that's true, the less benefit of the doubt you're asking for. And learn, before I go on, 2 questions. You first. 3 questions. Okay. Name.
You said you interned here, right?
I interned and then I got hired as a contractor. But first, name.
Daniel.
Daniel's talking.
So was that experience during the internship, or was it?
It was throughout.
So
like,
I was curious, like what kind of like authority you could bring to it, like saying I really want this feature.
Oh, that part.
They accepting that as like an option.
I was on career mode after I was no longer an intern. I don't know that would have mattered. I think there's this weird little psychology thing where as long as you're like kind and respectful, people tend to give you as much authority as you seem to have. And I, as anyone, get a little nervous not knowing where my boundaries are when I first start a company. But I'm like pretty willing to risk overstepping my bounds and then backpedaling. I'm like, oh, sorry, you're right. It was just an idea. But people want to see that you're engaged. People want to see that you care. And if you're going to be the guy who just does what you're told, then you're not as valuable as someone who's also going to contribute better versions of something. Because in general, the first idea is never good, and the second idea might be good, and the 3rd through 10th idea are probably decent, and the 20th idea is great, right? And if you're not going to be part of that conversation getting past the first couple ideas or the first couple versions, then we can hire anybody else, and they'll be at least as good as you. So it's good to at least be part of the conversation. Don't check out because you're new. Don't check out because you're the intern. Because the people who get quickly hired out of internships are the people who own their stuff, have good ideas, and are willing to like admit when they're not, like aren't pig-headed, right? Don't have an ego about them. They're about the game. They just want to make the game good, and it's not about me or you. It's about the game, and framing it that way with respect is always a good idea. I saw you.
Yeah, Zach.
Zach.
Might be stepping back a little bit, but you said you work you do system design at Naughty Dog, and you brought up the lockpicking mechanic. What else have you worked on while you were there? And when it comes to, is the company culture, is it such that you could pretty much go to the producer or whoever and say like, I have this idea, and they'll hear you out about a mechanic or scenario or whatever?
At Naughty Dog specifically?
Yes.
The question summed up, because it just occurred to me that not everybody can always hear these things, especially online. How much freedom do I have to come up with new ideas and pitch them at Naughty Dog? It's kind of the question.
Yeah, and also what else have you worked on?
And what else have I specifically worked on? So when I started on Uncharted 4, I started pretty late, right? I was in the last 10 months. The game was pretty well figured out. The level was pretty well figured out. I was finishing it off. There's always give and take and redesign even towards the end. In that game, it was a lot more, my role was a lot more about finishing things. So I didn't come up with much new stuff. I came up with some, though. And I think the important, so here's a good example. Bruce Straley is a cool guy, and he was one of the creative directors on Uncharted 4. And I was in a meeting with him in like my 3rd week or something. And I was with him and a couple other people who were in the room were people who'd been on the level for longer, who was like the level designer on the level, a couple artists who were there for a while. And Bruce is a super smart guy, but he's also hyper collaborative. But because he's smart and he's the lead, I think anytime there's a danger, know this if you're ever a lead, people kind of start deferring to you. They're like not sure if you're going to have an ego or want pushback. And so he was giving out all these ideas, and a lot of them were great. And then like one of them just hit me as like a terrible idea. I was like, no, oh gosh, because I've been playing this and that's not how it plays, and I think you're wrong because of this. And I was like, surely someone else will say something. And no one did for like a moment. And I was like, actually, I just and I said my point, and he was super receptive to it immediately, and we hashed back and forth, and I was like sweating bullets because this is like your game third week on the job at Naughty Dog, and your game director is giving you an idea, and you're like, actually, I think you're wrong. It's unnerving. Said better, hopefully. I don't remember, but I found out like 6 months after that he really liked that I did that. He was like he walked out and told some other person, not me, of course. He was like, that new guy, it's pretty cool. Like I'm glad he speaks up in meetings. That's good. And that's like all he said, but that's like glory. So that's kind of a side tangent. But you always have freedom. So at Naughty Dog specifically, like if you own your area, you're the guy or girl, you're the person for your area. Like no one else owns your area, it's yours. And like maybe some other people own some different aspects of it, like the level designer gets the level design part, but like if it's your level, it's on you to make it great. And if it's not great, it's on you that it's not great. So what comes with that responsibility is also like freedom and empowerment to do things like that, design new systems and stuff. So I didn't design a ton of systems. I helped figure out, everything's a collaboration. I helped figure out going to speak Uncharted here, so hopefully if you played it. There was like where you first find the cross in the prison, and you have to like look around the walls and like figure out what brick to pull. I helped figure that out. That was really cool. We fought back and forth so much on like Roman numerals versus like astrological signs. It was this like 2-month debate, and it was fun. Eventually, like everyone was against me, and I was like, okay, cool, do it your way. And then like I wasn't really on that level, so I went off to do my own thing. And like a month later, they're like, "Yeah, we put it back your way." And I was like, hee hee hee. But they'd also changed some things, so it wasn't really my idea. When I ask for new questions, the questions I haven't asked will go back up. But as far as systems that are like full systems that were only me, probably lockpicking is the only example of like the thing that pretty much I spearheaded and no one else really touched the code of. It was like me and an animator, and then I would just get lots of feedback. And I have a really good story about that later. I saw a hand here. Still a question?
Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah. You're also Daniel?
Yeah. So it was the same question. Like
3 of them.
If you're like a new hire, then like how would you go about just like bringing up a counterpoint to somebody if they have a feature you don't like that you think wouldn't affect the game? So
sure.
Like you already answered that, but it's just like really scary talking to somebody who's been at Naughty Dog for years.
Yeah, like 10 years. Like,
how do you say like,
yeah.
I'm not sure about that feature, but I'm the new guy?
Cool.
Like,
so for the internet, the question is, how do you go about raising that concern when you're the new guy and people have been there for decades? And it's weird at Naughty Dog. A lot of companies, EA is not one of these, actually. People stay at EA too, but a lot of companies, like there's a lot of turnover just because that's the nature of the industry. In Naughty Dog, there are people who've been there for 2 decades, which is unprecedented. And so, like, how do you question those people? I think a lot of times you just get good at like reading a room and reading people, like practice that a bit and practice it here and be ready to be wrong about it. I've been wrong about it. I once went, because I was once getting a whole bunch of feedback about these little details in a level towards the end of Uncharted 4. And these little art things that hadn't been done, and I was like, kept being told about them, like, hey, have you checked into this yet? And I was like, okay, cool, I guess I'll go do that. And so I went over to talk to the artist, and I start like somewhat sheepishly, because I'd never worked with this guy, I never really talked to him much. And I was telling him like the big things that need to get done, and he was just like listening and saying, yep, okay, cool. And wasn't giving me much like pushback or anything, so I was like, cool, I guess I should keep going. And I started getting really noodly. It was like, oh, also like these little details around here and blah, blah, blah. And this is a good learning experience for me, he was like, dude, I've been here for like 6 years. I know what I'm doing. You don't have to tell me that you can see the edge in the texture. I see it. I know. And I was like, whoa, okay. He was very like aggressively annoyed. And I ended up, that situation ended up pretty well, because I backed up and I was like, okay, well, I'm sorry. I am new here, and I don't know who's been here for a long time. And to see where I'm coming from, because he just thought I didn't trust him, right? That's what I eventually figured out that why he was upset. And so what helped was me saying, well, what I'm hearing on my side is obviously like these are the last details to go in, but I keep being told about these by like my lead designer and other people they keep pointing it out to me, like I've had it pointed out to myself like 10 times in the last 2 weeks. And so I figured it would be better to say something than nothing, because I know you're very busy and you've got other things that you're working on. And once I said that, he simmered down and was like, all right, good point. Sorry to bite your head off. I was like, cool, no, but that's good. It's good to know the boundary. And it's good, like now I have that as a bench point. And so he helped me learn that bench point. And in the end, like later that day, he gave me a cold remedy. So like we were cool. That's true. Ginger? I don't know. So a lot of it's like you read the person. Most people hopefully don't get too upset when they do. Just like don't try to address the thing that they're talking about, because usually they're upset about like one layer past. And just like seek to understand first why that little friction moment just happened. And sometimes just let it go and talk about it later. Be like, I was thinking about it, and sometimes you'll understand more later. So a lot of it's like somewhat a squishy answer, but I get good at reading people. Don't be sheepish, right? But be generous with like your understanding and you're seeking to understand. And sometimes just try their way, especially if it's fast. I have a really good point about that later as well. But worst case scenario, especially if it's an easy thing to try or try a small version of, if you can prove that it's a bad idea and they can play it and be like, oh yeah, it was a bad idea, that's much more powerful than you being like, I don't think so, guys. So it's a lot of answers, but feel it out, and you'll get better as you practice even here. There's someone over here. Still question?
Hi, Christian.
Christian.
You were talking about tailoring your resume and
Yeah.
the work that you're doing
Mm-hmm.
towards what you want to do. How would you feel that your experience at FIEA and EA and Alumni contributed to, I guess, like the transformation in design that you're doing from FIEA into systems design? Or were you doing systems design stuff at FIEA?
Yeah. I was doing, so I thought there was this huge delineation between like a systems designer and a gameplay designer and all these other things. Really, I think there's one delineation at this point, at least at Naughty Dog, maybe three. There's like the idea designer who works a lot in spreadsheets and like documents. That's not common at every studio, but it's common at some. We had some of those at EA, and that's a really good, especially when there's a lot of noodly number things that you can more or less figure out without playing it. That's totally valid. At Naughty Dog, you're pretty much a level designer, or you're the other thing. And the other thing is a gameplay designer who works more in code. And so I did lots of code things. I made systems, but I also made like little one-off things. We do a lot of little one-off things at Naughty Dog. I think a lot of studios that do cinematic things do, right? Because they all have to be unique or you notice. So yes, I did a lot of stuff. That's part of that, like, don't spread yourself too thin, but also diversify, like eventually. Luckily, I came in with a CS undergrad, so like I didn't have to spend time learning to program here. I could just spend time learning different reasons to program, as it were. Does that answer your question? I feel like I rambled a bit. Okay. Cool, given that focus. I talked about that. Last EA lesson is iterate really, really quickly. So I'll tell this story now. You can waste so much time in your head or trying to fine tune the version of it that you think is going to be great without trying something drastically different. I spent a while with this concept that you had 5 minutes to do this whole challenge, and you had just catastrophically high energy, so much so that you probably wouldn't run out, but you had to hit all of the rings along the way. You could like skip one in theory and come back to it, but that's really inefficient. And I was like hung up on this idea that it was a checkpoint. Like every ring you got through just gave you 10 seconds more, right? It was a race. That didn't really work. It didn't work for a lot of reasons. Partially, like the stress of it made you worse at playing, right? And it made you think you're thinking suddenly about this whole course, and you're like plotting all of the rings in your whole course. It's all in your head, and people were really bad at it. Changing it so you had way less energy, just enough energy to consistently get to the next ring, and just saying, get to the next ring, and that's the one that's glowing. like suddenly, like the course, without changing the course at all, people were way better at it, and they were efficient. Because part of the reason why they were doing so poorly on the timed one is, if you have 5 minutes to do something and you have no concept of how long it would take on the average to do, you're going to rush, because what if you need every second, right? Wouldn't it suck to get to the very end and you should have gone a little faster? So people would like blitz speed, and the physics in our engine like didn't like that. It was really hard to turn at high velocity. At least it was really hard to turn at high velocity when you could also turn well at low velocity. Like it had to be tuned for one end or somewhere along that spectrum. And so just changing it so that, like just changing the focus, which somebody had suggested immediately, like, well, hey, what if you did it this way? And I was like, yeah, no, I kind of wanted to be like this race thing. And they were like, okay, that's cool. And they didn't really call me on it. But had I tried that like a month sooner, I would have had so much more time to do other things or to make this even better. And so just like, especially when there's fast things, like iterate quickly, try other things, especially when you just implemented a mechanic or concept and somebody's like, oh yeah, it could be like this or this pretty different version of the same thing. If it's fast to try it. Because what you really don't want to happen is you spend a month or 2 months, especially at FIEA when there's even less time, making this one version of it as tight as possible, and then somebody else goofing off late one night changes the parameters into the one they wanted, and it's way more fun without even tuning. Because then you're like, well, shoot, I was full of myself. I was cocky. It was my idea, and I owned it. So like, own your areas and own your ideas, but understand that none of them are yours. The game has to be good. That's really the goal. Yes?
I just have a
name.
Question.
Zach.
As far as the way you went from EA Tiburon to going to Naughty Dog, I've heard multiple kind of stories of people who started at EA Tiburon and then moved on to another company.
Sure.
Would you say that the experience you got from Tiburon was something that you appreciate in what you know now going forward to other companies?
Oh,
I would recommend that for other people in the same situation.
Absolutely, yeah. Like every company is going to teach you lessons. The specific work I did was actually really useful for getting the job that I got at Naughty Dog. They were intrigued by all the iteration that I did in this mode, and they were intrigued by the story stuff in the other mode, and then being kind of a really good combination. But no matter what you do, if you're doing the work that is the job you're applying for, that looks good. Also, I shipped a game. Like shipping a game is huge. If you've like looked yet at a lot of requirements for a lot of studios, a lot of them are like, oh, also has shipped a game. And it's like that classic catch-22 of like, oh, I need a car to get to work, but I can't afford a car because I don't have a job. So what do I do? So it's the same thing. Like if you can, whatever your first trip, especially if you can get a AAA job right out of here, like don't be so picky. That like maybe you're not into sports, maybe you're not into story games, but like but take a job rather than no job, like because a year after or 2 years after having a ship title at all, it makes you immensely more appealing to someone, because it not only does it mean that you like managed to stay hired for that long, but it also means like you understand like production cycles. You worked in like some size of team. You've done all the steps that they can now assume that you know how to do, because this grad school is great, and a lot of the stories you can tell, if you can get to the interview part, will demonstrate that you've done by the end of FIEA a lot of the things that you need to feel out while at a real job. A lot of people don't know that about our grad school offhand, or any grad school for that matter. It's still school, it's academic, and there's kind of this weird divide in like practical application in academia, in game industry, where people who are seemingly only academic so far, there's a little bit of like I don't know, that's not really true in practice, right? So yes, it was absolutely helpful to me and will be helpful to anyone. Yeah. You. Sorry. Alyssa.
Comfortable answering. Can I ask what drew you to Naughty Dog from EA?
So I am a bold guy, apparently. I figure start at the top, like start at the things that like you really want to do and work your way down. So partially I just like looked for open positions and they had posted positions, but I came out of Naughty Dog, or we just ended the project and I like wasn't sure if I was going to stay on, if I was even going to be renewed contractually, right? Because they weren't sure they were going to put the people from the golf team who were already full time, and so I was like, okay, I should start looking around. And I saw a Naughty Dog and I saw somewhere else. And that was also like a pretty well-known AAA studio that makes a pretty good game every couple of years. And I was like, well, sure, I'll just start there. And I just fired off a resume in an application and just like moved on. And so obviously the appeal of Naughty Dog, I think, is everybody gets, like they're prestigious, which I don't really super care about, but they're prestigious because they do really good work. And I'd heard the blip that like their management structure was like incredibly up my alley with like, you own your stuff and you go get it done, and like we're all here together and everyone's good, and if anything messes up, that's yours, it's because it's your fault, but no one's gonna like damn you for it. They're just gonna tell you to go fix it, and like not a lot of management as far as like control. There's oversight. We have leads and stuff. I don't mean to, I never really specified. We do have leads who like check on things, but it's a lot more like helpful than for me, like my personality than the more managerial, time-based estimates and all that jazz. Because I'm really bad at time estimates. I think it's probably part of it. Style of management was very appealing. Yeah. So that was definitely it, and the content, and the fact that if they didn't keep me, because I was originally a contractor at Naughty Dog, and I was like, well, if they don't keep me on, there's still a lot of jobs around there, so I'll be in the right area. So that didn't hurt either. Yes.
Hi, I'm Peter.
Peter.
In your experience, the jobs that do require applicants to have had at least one shipped game, does Capstone count for that? Do people typically consider your Capstone project as a shipped game, even though it's not really technically shipped?
Depends on if you ship it, because you can. Right, like Hit technically was Steam greenlit. That was good. I'm forgetting. There's a game that just yep, that one. That made Steam as well. I believe Pitch Jumper came out on iOS or some such. So like those were all shipped games. So like, yes, a lot more if that's the thing. It depends on how impressive it is and how relevant it is to the company, right? If you make a farm sim game that's really cool, but you're applying to I don't know, Tiburon, maybe they don't care as much about that. Or if you make a sports game and you apply to Sucker Punch, maybe they don't care about that. I don't know. It depends. I would say it's always better to it's like that cheesy, like you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Like I didn't think I was going to get a callback even from Naughty Dog. I was lucky because they really needed people, and that gave me a shot to prove myself. But you can always apply to something, and then if you don't get in, like a couple years later, you can apply again after you've done something else. So I would say always take a shot, put your best foot out there, like tailor your resume as much as possible to that long shot if you feel it's a long shot. But that's partially why I say like take the first good opportunity you get out of FIEA, because some people get 3 offers and most people don't, because you're kind of unproven, right? And so take the opportunity to prove yourself whenever possible. But there are like everything on a resume or everything on I heard someone say recently that there's like two ends of the spectrum for like when you're applying to a job. It's, oh, look at all these requirements. Hey, I can do that one. I'll apply. Versus, hey, look at all these requirements. Oh, I can't do that one, so I won't apply. Like, this person applied has a chance of getting it. This person will never get it, despite the fact that they can do all the things but the one, right? So if you feel perfect for a job, but you haven't shipped a game, that's possibly negotiable. Any one thing is negotiable if you're good at learning, right? So hopefully does that answer your question?
Yes.
Cool. Sorry if I'm being super long-winded. I'm bad at stopping myself. Yes.
Hi, I'm Guillaume.
Guillaume?
I want to ask a question about this slide.
Yes.
You were talking about iterating and how you wished you had been willing to experiment more with this sort of baseline concept. But this is in the context of your time being pretty heavily managed, right? So did you have to sort of say, well, actually, I'm sorry, I need to tell the DD that I'm going to rebuild this for the 3rd time because I heard a different idea from how I'm going to develop this. And what exactly would you consider a fast timeline on which is appropriate to definitely just try something new if you're not sure?
Okay. Repeat the question to make sure I got it. The second part of the question was, what is a fast timeline for iteration? And the second is, how do you manage, like, when you have time constraints and a lot of managerial oversight, how do you manage trying a different version of something and excusing that time cost? So one, like, EA isn't a taskmaster. Like, they don't crack whips. Like, I had built-in time to iterate on this current version, right? Which means I also have time to iterate in whatever way I think is best. Like, everyone's going to trust you some. and that the leash they give you is different. But like I could have spent, because obviously I spent a month off and on iterating on this. I could have spent some of that earlier on trying the different version. I mean, like everyone agrees this is better. So if for some reason you have no time to iterate on a concept at all anyway, then it's moot because you can't try version B just like you can't make version A better. So you'll probably, you find time. Also, like, no one's ever going to stop. If it's really short, if it's like a 3-hour task, no one's going to stop you from staying late one day and trying it because you really care, right? That's pretty cool. If you were like, hey, I stayed late, guys, and I did this cool thing, and everyone loves it, they're going to be like, well, great. Thanks for that free time, and thank you for making the game better. We've got our eye on you, right? As far as what is a short task, I think there's no hard and fast rule. It kind of depends on the context. Like a short AI rework is a bigger task than a short, like this, changing this took me, yeah, maybe an hour or two. Maybe. It may have taken me a lot less because I literally just like got rid of the time limit. That's commenting out code, easy to do. I changed the starting energy. The hardest thing was like making it so that when you go through one of these things, you got energy back. That may have taken an hour. So like that's a pretty short task. That's the type of thing I could do over lunch. So certainly that's really short. Anything that takes half a day or less, I would say is a short task. For me, for art, it's different. For programming, it can be different, depends on your systems. I think it depends. If your average task is a week and something takes a day, that's a short task. If your average task is an hour and something takes a day, it's a long task. So it's context driven. You feel it out. But yeah, if you think you can squeeze it in between things, it's probably a short task. That seems like the end of our questions here. No, got another one. Man, Rory McElroy's killing it today.
Hey, yeah, my name is Peter.
Peter, another Peter.
Yeah. Peter. So you mentioned that in the Naughty Dog interview, you talked about how you iterated on this. Do you think, so if you had came up with the idea that you settled on initially, like from the outset, obviously there still would have been iteration involved, but do you think that would have hurt you on the Naughty Dog interview?
You know, I don't know that I told them about this challenge specifically, and I don't know that they played it. So you know, maybe, probably not. It's the kind of thing that like. Actually, I think I did tell them about this exact thing. I think I told them about my failure, but I told them in the context that it's like, look, I failed to do this well the first time, but I'm telling you that I learned that lesson from failing so hard, which means that when I work for you, I don't need to learn that lesson again. I've already learned it. People, like almost every interview you will ever be in, I'm guessing if it's a pretty decent interview, at some point they'll be like, what have you messed up? Like in some version, they'll ask you that question, like, what's your biggest failure / regret in your job, not in life, because, you know, it's just an interview. And then you'll tell these stories, and you hopefully have thought about them enough to actually learn a lesson so that when they ask you, you can frame it good. Because you can be like, yeah, I was a jerk and was super sexist and punched a guy. What are you going to do? You know, and then they're just going to like cross your name off the list and be like, well, it was great, thank you, we'll contact you. Versus if you've learned from such a thing, then the thing they hear is good. He can learn on his own from his mistakes or her mistakes, and doesn't need me to babysit him, because nobody wants to babysit you. Even if they have like a control issue, they don't really want to babysit you. They want you to go do awesome things, and then they can take credit for it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Do you have a follow-up or?
Do you think that like talking about how you had the problem and then how you solved it was better than just being like, yeah, I came up with this like pretty cool idea and I implemented it?
Yeah, because I couldn't have told that story during the "what have you messed up" question. You're gonna mess up things, so like you can't avoid that. You're gonna do something hopefully that you notice was less than perfect in hindsight. I would say that the game would have been slightly better probably, because I would have just had more time to make it slightly better if I'd done this thing sooner. But it doesn't hurt to also have stories that you did well or that you did poorly and learn from. Like, they're both good. You'll need them both. You will be asked for them both. Somebody will ask you, what are you most proud of on your last project? And you'll be like, great, I can tell you about that. And they're like, cool, what are you least proud of? And you're like, oh boy, let me tell you this story. And they get it because they've also done that, as long as you got something out of it, right? Everything's onwards and upwards. I thought I saw another hand over here. Yes. Kevin.
Are you allowed to say what you're working on now?
I can't tell you anything about it, but I'm working on The Last of Us Part 2. That's the sound they make. No.
The clickers.
Yeah. And that's the last question I can answer about it. I can tell you only what's released, and I might mess up something if I try and tell you about that. So I'm not going to talk about it at all. But I'm glad you like it. I'm excited too. I'm going to move on. I'm not going to move on.
Do you feel like the more informal environment at Naughty Dog is because it's a smaller company, or that's just...
Nah. I think it happens more in smaller companies, but I have a friend who works at a smaller company that, I mean, they're not like super formal, but the way their structure's set up, it's a little bit more constricting, and like a lot of the, like there's not a lot of good communication in that company because the management is like a little uncomfortable and weird and controlly and like jumps the gun on judging quality and like doesn't know how to judge things as works in progress and things, and always judges as a final product. And so feedback's not always useful, right? So like communication is, I guess, kind of where I would like to steer this question at least, which is the formality of communication, right? Like, oh, it must be email so that we have a document, or hey, just go up out of your seat and go talk to them, which is the Naughty Dog way. Naughty Dog's not a small company. There's several hundred people. It's one floor, like I phrased it before, as small in comparison to EA Tiburon. It's not a small company. A lot of companies are smaller. So it comes from the fact that it was a small company, like an actual small company, like 30 people or less for a long time. And that culture has stuck. But a lot of it's because they try very hard to only hire people who don't need the management structure, right? Because nobody wants to give it, right? They just everyone wants to focus on making a game, and as much as possible. So that's who they hire. They hire people who are capable of being talented enough to run in the good direction, but being autonomous enough to run at all. So I don't know that the current size at least, has anything to do with it. I think it's how it started, and the culture has managed to persist based on who they hire, and how they talk to them when they first get in. Okay, good. So I also worked on this game, which is this is my level. This is a far shot of Scotland. It's like a cathedral and a crane and a broken other cathedral thing. Or actually, this is a monastery and a graveyard, now that I remember. Anyway, I worked on this game, and it was really fun, and I did some things well and some things not well. And I have notes about it. Actually, so my notes on this one come directly from my leads. My first, I think it's 7. After this game shipped, I got a bunch of notes, but they pretty much boiled down into, I think, 7 things that I personally needed to do better on. So these are the lessons that I learned. And something that no one told me to do, but I had the idea to do, and I think it's a great idea, and I recommend doing it, is anytime you know you need to get better at something, write it down on like a sticky note and plaster it to your TV or your keyboard or something, somewhere where you'll see it often enough to go, oh yeah, I need to do that. So here are my notes. As I said before, prototype fast, because turns out I wasn't great at it. I like to do things right. It comes from being a computer science major, right, where like you get very used to being like, oh, I'm going to make this structure, and so I'm going to like spend hours without running the game typing things out, which kind of works more as a programmer, but as a designer, as a scripter, you need to be a little faster than that. So like making sure the script is in the game and runs at all is a good idea before you put anything in it. And then like making sure that you can create the object that you're imagining, that you don't do some weird silly error. It's a good idea before you make that object complicated and hard to debug. So these are the things that I've learned to do better. Just literally testing it more often is a big help for me, and a big part of like implement things fast. This note came from Bruce when I was pulled on to the boss fight 3.5 weeks before the game was out of our hands. That's not a lot of time. And it needed a lot of work. I helped a little bit on the actual mechanics of it, but a lot of what I did was like all the chaos that's happening around you and the fire that's coming up and there's all these boards falling down and it's dangerous and hot. That was me. And I was like, one of the things that they were like, we want like boards and stuff on fire falling. And I was like, cool. So I spent like days making this crazy complicated system that would do it and time it all out well. And it eventually worked, but Bruce was like, hey, like we were meeting about it every day for like half an hour. It's like, where is this? Where is this? Where is this? And eventually he just came to my desk and it was kind of working. It was dropping like one board every minute, which is not much. And he's like, it needs to be a lot more and it needs to work. And I'm going to be back in an hour and we're going to look at it together. And I was like, huh. And nothing will make you move faster than a fire under you like that. And in an hour, he came back. And because of that pressure, granted, I already had some structure set up, but that was good. But because of that pressure, when he sat down and he played it, he was like, "It's actually pretty good." And I was like, he's like, "It still needs to be more." And I was like, "Really?" I multiplied every value by 100 to just make it happen constantly. Like it was an inferno. And he's like, "Yeah, I could use a little more, and like stop dropping boards on my own head, and then we'll be good." And so that was like. That was where this note came from. He's like, I don't know about this Daniel guy. I may have misunderstood about him. He takes forever to do things. And so don't be that guy. Get feedback often is the second note. I didn't get feedback like ever because it was that new guy thing, right? Where I was like, I don't want to question other people too much, but I also don't want to like show them my imperfect partial work or bother them. Like everyone's super busy. We're in crunch time. I didn't want to bother people with like, am I doing this right? Is this good? And as such, everything actually did take more time because I'd do something and then they'd be like, tear it all down, try it again, because you messed up this simple thing that is how we do things here to make it the final quality better. So ask people to play it. One thing that's literally, it's one of my later comments, is not only ask for your feedback verbally and talking about it, people like literally hand them the controller, which is terrifying because most of the things you make, especially when you're making them, don't really work. Like you can show someone how it looks because you know the golden path, or like you accidentally made a golden path because that's how you've been like playing it while you iterate on it, and then as soon as they turn left, it all falls into sticks and tinder, and you're like, oh shoot, yeah, I didn't handle that case. Everything breaks if you do anything but what I was doing, and you should find that out sooner than later. So let someone else play it and don't talk to them, don't explain it unless you really, really have to. In which case, explain as little as possible. Because that will wreck your world as fast as anything. Also love your QA, because that's effectively the same thing. Every concern, we talked about this way earlier, but raise every concern you have. Respectfully, politely, but if you care about your game, which you should, and you have a concern about something, raise it sooner than later, because like that crane right there, there's an area of the game, in the shipped game, where you climb up it, or you climb up near it, and then you fight some people and you move on. That was not how that scene originally was. There was a lot more to it. There was this crazy combat sequence. You were hanging off the thing and getting shot, and somebody was actually moving the crane. And there were a lot of things wrong with it really early on, and like I didn't know what I was doing. So I had this massive like 10,000 line script with all these different crazy states, so many animations, and it ended up getting cut, as I kind of just alluded to, because it just didn't get there fast enough. And it either could have been cut way sooner, saving me and other people, mostly animators, months of work if I'd have been like, this isn't going to work. Or at the very least, if I'd raised the concerns of why, we could have addressed them, and maybe this would have been in the game. Consequently, know when to let things go. I said fight for your features before, which is what I was trying to do for this thing desperately, because I didn't want my things to get cut, because that would make me a failure, and then they wouldn't hire me, and I'd go live in a box somewhere and never be loved. But eventually this did get cut, and I kept trying to like work on it on the side to redeem myself, which was a further waste of time. I didn't do that too much before I was kind of caught, and Neil Druckmann was like, stop it. I was like, oh, I'm sorry. And that was his note to me, is like, you need to learn to let things go. Like, I appreciate your passion, but like sometimes things get cut and it's just what happens and you move on. So there's balance, moderation in all things, including moderation. Because I wasted further time even after it was cut from being this moment. And because I wasn't really hearing his reasons. His reasons were, we were just doing combat, and then we just did some more combat, and then there was this big combat thing, and then we do combat, like 2 more combat beats after this. That's too much of one thing in a row. Even if we get it to work flawlessly, it's too much of one thing in a row. So like I was fighting a losing battle because I was trying to make something work for my sake, not for the game's sake. And that's when I should have recognized to let it go, because the reasoning was that it shouldn't be in the game. It doesn't fit. Pace yourself. I worked a lot of overtime. I worked probably more than I needed to, especially at the beginning, and you can burn out. And I've been known to do that. Not burn out, well, I guess kind of, but I just keep doing it even when I'm burned out, and then I like get gross sicknesses all the time and infect the office, and then everyone's sick and nothing gets done. So pace yourself, take little breaks. That's where like us doing improv for fun once every other week was actually incredibly good for our health, probably, because it was just a different room. We're not staring at a fluorescent screen. We're talking and we're having fun and we're laughing, which is good for your body and stuff. And so work really hard, but also don't work too hard. Yes.
You find it like
I'll see you later.
Not to think about the project that you're currently working on when you're not like at work.
So like, do I think about what I'm working on even while I'm not working?
Right.
Sometimes. I have lots of other things that I like to think about. I like to play Dungeons and Dragons, so I'll come up with characters, and I'm starting a campaign soon, so I've been planning for that. And so like, there's other things that concern my mind, but I've certainly woken up. As often as not, I'll wake up with an idea for some harebrained thing I'm doing on the side, as I will for something at work. And I'm like, what if we did this? And sometimes it's actually a good idea, and sometimes I wake up more and I realize that it's not even an idea. But yeah, it happens. Yeah. Anything that you are passionate about is going to infect your life, and that's okay. Like work-life balance doesn't necessarily mean like you're not allowed to work or think about work while off in life, because of course, while you're at work, sometimes you're going to think about the things happening in your life. Like, you're human. I saw someone up there first.
Hi,
Tom.
So you were talking about overworking yourself and getting to the
Can I get a water?
burnout.
Yes.
And I've heard that that's a thing that a lot of essentially veteran designers don't normally do that. Like as you get more experience, that you do that a lot less.
Crunch and burnout?
Well, that you don't like do a lot of overtime or you don't work yourself out. So is that false? Because I've heard that before.
I think everybody crunches sometimes if your studio crunches at all. Like, you can't just not crunch when your studio is crunching. Everyone will give you weird looks. I think you learn to pace yourself. Something that I did on Lost Legacy that I didn't do on Uncharted 4, and that was good for me to do, is one night a week I left early, like 8:30. Yeah, it was great. Or even 8 sometimes, wild man. And I played board games with a friend, Gloomhaven. It's a great game. You should play it. So that was really good. And that was kind of something I learned. That's like my version of pace yourself even during crunch. It's like one night a week. Unless I somehow really couldn't, which almost never happened. Like I would go into work early. I'd like work through lunch if I needed to, but I didn't stay late. And I got sick a lot less. So for what it's worth. As far as I think that the longer you do it, the more you learn kind of the things you need to do. There are people who like never stayed late, but they would get in crazy early because they were very productive in the mornings because there's no one there. And even when there are a lot of people there, early enough, no one's talking to each other because they're like, sweet, I got in, so I didn't have to, so I could just work without interruptions, and they do that. So you just learn tricks, I think. There are plenty of everyone at Naughty Dog when we crunch. Everyone crunches some amount, and week to week is different. It's good to, but you learn how to pace yourself and what you need to pace yourself. Like my normal work week could very easily be 50 hours a week, partially because I'm young, right? We're young. We got all this energy and no wives or husbands. Well, some of us might. I don't know. No kids probably. And if you're here and you've got a kid, like good on you. That's awesome. That's very impressive. So like I can afford it a little bit more. And if I had 3 kids and a wife, I probably would just be more focused at work. That's also another thing. I think the more you work, the better you get at focusing at work and like not distracting yourself, not having things up in other tabs on internet, like closing all the things you're not really using, so as to minimize distraction, putting headphones on with music that you don't get distracted by, things like that, so that while you're at work, you're getting more work done. Because it's not really about working more hours, it's about getting more done. And that's why crunch happens. It's like you're crunching a lot of work into a small amount of time. For anybody who's not figured it out by now, crunch means doing a lot of work in a little bit of amount of time and tending to work a lot of overtime while doing so, for those at home. I saw someone in the middle. Yes.
Yeah, I was just asking, like, what's the average time you go to work, and then you work, and do you have your weekends?
Do I have weekends?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. No. I think I was here. I think I was in the FIEA building for 70 hours a week, on the average, which is kind of fine because you're not always working during that, but you're working for a lot of it. And classes break up the monotony and stuff. At EA, crunch time was like a lot of things, very tightly governed, which means they would tell you exactly how late they would like you to work, and tell you not to work past that, because they don't want you to burn out either. So at EA, they would be like, Tuesdays and Thursdays are now crunch days. Please work till 10 or 9 or whatever it was. I don't really remember. Sometime more than normal. But and then that ramped up a bit, and I think they always had Friday not crunches, if I remember correctly, or at least for as long as possible. We had occasional weekend days, but they would specify like, don't come on this weekend. We're doing okay on the schedule, or we need to bump up a little bit of hours. Come in just Saturday for at least half the day, things like that. At Naughty Dog, like a lot of things, it's a lot more up to your discretion. So I know people who get in early, and as I said, they've got like families, right? So they wake up with their kids, send them to work, or send them to school, and just come into work at like 8. And they don't work as late because they came in earlier, and they want to go home and be with their family. I worked an irresponsible amount of overtime because I didn't know anybody in Los Angeles, and I could. And I wanted to prove myself, especially on Uncharted 4. In Los Angeles, if you ever go work in California in general, there's a law that if you are a contractor, you cannot work every day of the week, always. I think the law is actually that you have to not work 4 days out of the month, which effectively is like 1 day a week. Because it'd be weird if you just like, well, I worked every day so far, so I'm not going to be here, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So that's a little bit of like legal built-in pacing yourself. I would work weekends sometimes. Not everybody would. And I think usually on weekends, people were hyper-focused. They talk to each other less because they just want to get in there and get out and do something else with their life. Because crunch is tiring, even if you love it. And I like the work enough, and we all did, that the work is still fun even when you're doing more of it than you want to do right now. It varies from company to company. It varies how close your schedule is, how well it was planned out, how much people are trying to stuff in beyond like what is reasonable. Sometimes I would work weekends, sometimes I wouldn't. I would usually, even when I wasn't a contractor, because I'm not a contractor anymore, and even now, even on Lost Legacy, I don't think I ever worked a full 7 days more than once, maybe. So I always had 1 day off, and usually my whole weekend, because I would rather do it during the week. So that's a little bit to your discretion. Essentially, at Naughty Dog, the philosophy is, as long as you're getting your work done, no one's really going to call you on it. If you feel like you're slipping behind and leaving early, then somebody might mention it. I've never heard of that happening. Versus obviously at EA, they just set the expectation explicitly. They like email out to everyone like, this is what crunch time means this week. And you're like, okay, cool. Well, at least I know. I can plan my week. I can tell someone that, no, I can't hang out Wednesday because that's the day we're crunching. It depends company to company. Usually it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. Most people, like I happen to have worked at two good extremes, I think, along the like crunch and managerial aspects. So you're hearing the extremes of what you will probably work at more often. Someone over here I saw a hand, did I not? No? Cool. I laughed because I literally copied all of my notes that are hanging on the sticky notes in front of my dev kit TV on here, and somebody at some point, I didn't remember doing this, somebody at some point put an extra one on there because they thought it was funny that I'd done this, and it says, call mom at least once per week. And I wrote it here because it's actually a really good point that like go all in and like really get the most out, especially out of FIEA, but like go on your work, like especially if you like it. But like, there's more to life than just the job, and that's true for everyone, and everyone understands that. So like, don't forget to call the people who matter to you, and at least say hi. I like had people like calling me mad that I hadn't called them, which is a weird feeling. I was like, I'm talking to you now. How come you never call? That kind of a thing. But yeah, don't neglect everything. and I've said this before, but like super duper, just own your area. Own it. It's yours. If it's not good, it's your fault. But that also means if it's good, it's your fault. So don't inherit things. I inherited Scotland. I inherited it, right? When I started, I don't want to exaggerate. So I'm going to say almost before this. Almost every other designer had touched Scotland at some point and then decided they wanted to do some other part of the game and moved on. So like I was inheriting scripts from 4 or 5 different people in 4 or 5 different styles, some of them similar, some of them not. Different layout schemes and like the different levels in our engine. And I felt as like a contractor and like, oh, I'm at Naughty Dog and I'm all intimidated and I'm new here. I felt a lot of times, sometimes I would speak up for ideas, but a lot of times I was like, oh, this was the intention, this is what's already there. I should just do what they were doing and not try to improve it further. And it took me like till the end of the game to realize that like, oh, it's mine. I can change it if it's gonna, as long as I'm changing it for like the better, and if I'm not, then I can always revert it. Like you can always revert your changes. So own your things. Don't be passive in your job, in your career, on your team, on your project, on your task. Just because someone else worked on it ahead of time. Sometimes you need to do what they were doing because it was a good idea, and sometimes they were wrong, or at least not right as right as you can be standing on their shoulders. Just a few more, and is it possible for that I could get like a bottle of water? Thanks, man. Sorry to ask. I worked on Lost Legacy as well, and there's a couple things that I specifically learned from this, which is one of which I kind of learned on Uncharted 4, but I learned it truly on Lost Legacy. Don't waste your time when you don't understand something and somebody over there does. Like, figure it out. Don't waste their time by always asking them things. But like, if you don't get like a good example at Naughty Dog is like all the time we have these functions, or we have where's this art? How does the engine work? How do we do this thing? And like try and figure it out a little bit. But don't. I would like chug away for a couple hours. Go ask someone, and they're like, oh, it's called this. And it was like, oh, I wasn't using that word in my code search. There it is. And like already. Fun little trick that I developed for myself. This works well for me. Because I'm always nervous about like bothering people too much about things that are very obvious. So sometimes I'll be like, I'm stuck. I don't know what to look for. I don't know what to find. And this is more and more relevant with code. But anything that you can search, this is super relevant. I'd stand up and think, how am I going to ask them this question? And what are they probably going to ask me in return first for clarification? And sometimes the idea of their first response would give me something else to check that I need to check for due diligence before I talk to them. And that thing that I didn't check that now I will check, if you followed that, is exactly like the solution that I needed, right? So it's like, what's that thing with these words in it? And they're like, oh, have you tried this word? I'm like, they will ask about these words. And I'd go search that and I'd find the thing or whatever. So it's like a fun little trick. It's like, imagine what their first response to you is going to be and make sure you can answer that question before you go bother them about it. And if you can, then it's probably time to go bother them about it. Something that I think really helped me get this job, as far as not a contractor spot anymore, full-time, like full employee, is I made sure, this was very nerve-wracking to do, but I made sure to tell, without being repetitive and annoying, tell the people who were relevant to making me hired permanently that I really wanted the job and that I was gunning for it, and also to ask for advice on how to get there. So after I'd been there for a while, I talked one-on-one with Neil Druckmann. I talked one-on-one with my design leads. I even talked to like an artist and was like, hey, because he was like, they should hire you. And I was like, great, you should tell them that. And he was like, okay. And I was like, what, you will? And that helped. Like at some point, somebody told me like, yeah, somebody who's not a designer walked up and told us that we should hire you. And that made us think more about it. And I was like, yes. So like put yourself out there. Don't be annoying. I didn't talk to any of them like really more than once, I think. I also talked to Evan Wells, who's the president of the company, because someone was like, yeah, you should talk to him too. Just, don't be intimidated. And so I was, but I did it anyway. Because you can't tell people how to feel. It doesn't work. But I talked to him and he was like, cool, good to know. Keep doing good work and we'll see. And I was like, okay, yes, sir. Back to the job, sir. Any questions while I drink water? Anybody want to just sing for a moment? Say it again? Noah. Talk loud.
You live in California, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so is that Zephyr Hills?
Why, yes, it is.
Do you miss Zephyr Hills?
I don't know that I drank Zephyr Hills while I was here. I always just drank like the fridge filter because I'm a plebeian. just a scrub. Also at work, they've got these like cooler things that dispense cold water or hot water even. Ooh. And that's the way it is. Bye, Matt. So this is lockpicking is another really good example and a really clear example of just do the ideas that other people give you when they might be good. First, I need to explain how lockpicking works now. This water is too cold. Okay. Blah. Lockpicking is one stick only because we wanted you to be able to look around and do it in the middle of combat and like see people coming and break out of it. So the breakaway in combat is really fast so that you can like go hide or fight someone if you need to. But essentially it's all in one stick and you're searching invisibly by feel and by sound because I actually like borrowed a lockpick set and learned to lockpick. It's frightfully easy to do. And I was like, well, like mostly you're just working with one hand and mostly you're listening and feeling. Like you don't really look. There's nothing to look at. So I wanted to do that too. And so that was like my design goal, like my dream, was that you would do it by feel. And so we added all this rumble stuff and all these good audio cues and took a lot of iteration. But that's the gist of it. You kind of like find the sweet spot in the circle and like hang out there once you find it. And it's easy to bypass if you're going too fast. So you need to like feel for it and go slow, which felt very lockpicky. And you have to do that 2 to 3 times to pick the lock. And if you mess up, it's fine. Like if you miss the spot, you can just go back to where it was and click in. The first version of it was way punishing and way harder. The pins went up to 7 pins long because it does in real lock, so why shouldn't it be in this? Which is a terrible reason to do something. So it could be crazy long, and what made it worse is if you missed a pin, it would not only pick a new spot for that pin to be, it would also lose you on your last pin. So you like, if let's say you pick the first pin, cool. You pick the second pin, cool. You mess up the third pin, now you have to pick the second pin again, and there's still 5 pins. And so that was like, it's the kind of thing where I was like, oh, it's not too long because I can do it in like 18 seconds or 5 seconds or whatever it is. And I was like, if you're the person who implements a feature or looks at the piece of art and made it and blah, 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 you are never objective about how a regular player will interact with that thing because you are more familiar than any player will ever get unless they're like a crazy speedrunner and your thing is a good glitch, which hopefully it's not. So I was like all gung-ho about all these things like, where it backtracks you, where it might do a random shuffle if you mess up or if you back out and come back in, where there's lots of pins, all these things. And like one of the designers was like, I feel like it should never be more than 3. And I was like, that's so short though. And another designer was like, I feel like it shouldn't fail you. And I was like, it's so short though. And like several people each told me each of these things. I feel like it shouldn't do random shuffle. I'm like, but. And I didn't do any of those things for months, like 5 months, 6 months maybe of time. I was just going deep dive on what I was sure was right. And finally, I was like, you know how easy it is for me to test your idea? It's 3 values in like one spot in my script. That it took me to change it to this. I had to comment out a big block and change 2 numbers to get to something very similar to this. And then we obviously made it more like this because that's what we released with. And I was like super begrudging because as soon as I played it, I was like, this is so much more fun. How have I not learned this lesson yet? And another guy, and at some point I was like, well, now it's super easy though. And so it used to be that you could see like the visuals perfectly all the time because you needed that visual blip. And I was like, well, I'm going to try something crazy. I'm going to remove all the visuals so you just see where the stick is, but you don't see any like feedback about like whether you got the sweet spot. You have to feel it. You gotta feel the rumble, like Macho Man Randy Savage. And that ended up, and then I had someone else play it. I finally learned to like pass it off to someone immediately, and they had a blast. And they're like, that felt so cool and real, because I then couldn't. It's like your eyes are, if you are sighted, your eyes are gonna always override your other senses because we're built that way. And so that's how I got rid of that. Like no one was listening to the rumble or feeling for the rumble or listening to the audio cues, and that's how we ended up doing it. We like took away the visuals We added like a visual haptic system where the whole thing would shake instead of show you all of the mechanics. So there's a lot of people who think this doesn't work how it works because they actually can't see how it works anymore. And a lot of the stories I've heard from people about how it works, and they're like, that was so clever and impressive. And I'm like, good, I'm glad you think that's how that was happening for you. I'm glad that idea in your head was more fun than because what's really happening is very simple. So it's a little side lesson of like in design in general is like not telling people information is occasionally the better answer. Usually clarity is good, but sometimes mystery, like it's like in a horror movie when you can never see the monster, the thing in your head is so much worse than probably what they could do with effects. It's the same concept, but hopefully a thing in their head is so much better. And otherwise, bond with your team. When you're in crazy crunch time, like at least be in the trenches together, like use it as a bonding experience. There was one night where like 4 designers were left over, including myself, and it was like 11:30, and this was a rare night, but it happens. And somebody mentioned a Disney song, and I was like, I love that song. I kind of want to sing it. And then like 30 seconds later, someone like unplugged their headphones and cranked their speakers and were playing it, and we just spent 45 minutes working while singing Disney songs. Unfairly loudly in the office. It was great. Luckily, no one is around to hopefully be bothered. If anybody was around, then I'm sorry. Questions? Yes?
I have to know, what was the song?
What was the first song?
Yeah.
Knowing me, because I'm pretty sure I was the one who said that I wanted to sing it, it was probably like Be a Man from Mulan.
Yes.
It may have been Hakuna Matata, which is not from Aladdin, which is something I said earlier today. It is from The Lion King. Yeah, I'm glad you've already seen it. That's good. Yeah, sure. What's your name for the crowd? Girari.
Yes.
So cool. Freaking names are great.
Following this.
There's literally ice in this. That's how cold it is.
Following the session, we usually do like a design jam session for producers. Would you be willing to stick around?
Yeah, I'll be around.
And contribute?
I kind of want to, if anybody's into it, I kind of want to do improv with y'all. That'd be super fun. Just like pop over for a little bit. Cool. Yeah, but yeah, I'm going to hang around for possibly a while. Yeah. Peter?
Yeah. So, well, to an extent, I can and will answer this question partly for myself because so I'm going to go watch videos of people playing that game and see how they react to the lockpicking system. But
Some people hate it, some people like it.
But how did you tutorialize it to the player? And was that like a consideration in your mind as you were making it? Like, how will it work?
Sure. So the question is, how do you teach a mechanic like this? How did we teach a mechanic like that? I guess I can like show the screen again. This was actually the very first lockpick in the game. It was not always this way. Things changed. At some point, the first lockpick was way later. At some point, it was like potentially going to be earlier. There were all these ideas. So we had it was pretty simple. So you always think about how you're going to tutorialize it and like how easy is this to learn. Like a lot of really fun ideas we like simplified because it's just the game is not really enough about this to spend more time teaching this. So for this, we locked the camera in so you only had to worry about one stick, and we just showed you the things that are like the tense moment, the potential people who could discover you. They're like over there with that truck. Sorry, this image is kind of blurry. It was nicer on my screen. And then this UI popped up. And a single like string of text said, had a little like joystick that did this every once in a while, and said with a little L on it, and it said something to the effect of like push on stick. And so people went, oh, okay. And as soon as they pushed on the stick, the message changed because you're already pushing on the stick. It's like the concept of have you ever seen I think one of the Halos did this where it's like look up. And like if you pushed the stick up, then it knew that that's what you thought of as up. But if you pushed it down, then you knew you wanted it inverted. But it didn't tell you to like run around and shoot something as your first task. I think Portal did a really good job of tutorializing the same way, where it's just like push on this button, and it's like, oh, cool, that button does something. And so it's that kind of concept. So it's once you pushed on the stick, it changed to like move it around, feel for vibration. It was like okay, and so they moved it around, and as soon as they got the vibration, the message changed quickly to like hold. And it was like, oh, okay. And then as soon as you did that successfully once, you learned it. You were done. If you messed it up, I think 4 times, we showed it again, I think. Or maybe we took that out, I remember. It's that same kind of a thing, like just walk them through it. It's like if you were trying to teach your great-grandpapa how to play the game, first you would say, this is a controller. This button makes you jump. Push this button and see that it's true. So it's that same idea. That's actually how we did a lot of things. In Uncharted 4, we taught you cover by like freezing the game when you were near cover and being like, hit circle right now. And then you'd be like, okay, and we'd pop you into cover. And it's like, cool. Hit stick to like walk around and cover. And when you got to the edge, we like popped up a prompt that was like, you can go to that piece of cover from this piece of cover if you hold circle and point in that direction. So try it. And then you saw that it was true, and now you learned the skill. The same. I think that we did the same with gunfire. We were like, this button aims. Aim, cool. And then once you were aiming, this button shoots. And it's just like step by step. It's I've found a pretty good way. If you have to use text to tutorialize, it's like don't give them, this is how the mechanic works. Read this. It's first step, X. Does that answer your question well? Yeah. Cool. Someone in the back. I haven't. Very back, and then we'll work forward.
Robert?
Robert.
Have you been any tech artists at EA and Naughty Dog, and what were they like?
Yes, and they were cool. Everybody's cool, yo. Jive and stuff. Everyone's neat. What were they like as people, or like what was their job like? Okay, I thought you said like what were they like, and I was like, well, there's Bob and there's Sally, and they're both cool. Tech artists at so there's effects, right? And effects artists, I don't know if I'm qualified to answer this very well, but I'll try. Effects artists at Naughty Dog, which is more recently in my mind, obviously. A lot of what they do, they work with a lot of times gameplay designers and or programmers for things that are needed. Sometimes art direction. We'll come up with things that they need. Sometimes they'll just play the game and be like, we need an effect there. And so they'll make an effect in Maya and or whatever else they might use. This is where I'm not clearly paying enough attention. So they'll make an effect, and then they'll like do the whole process of like putting it in packages and stuff so that can be loaded in the game wherever it needs to be. And sometimes they'll load it in themselves, and because it's like a very global thing, or they'll just tell the relevant designer like, hey, when you need it, load this in. Some of them are more techie, and they'll actually like work in scripts to spawn them at the right spots, or on animation frames, or whatever, like dust particles on the ground. Spawn when like the step event happens, and they'll like hook into that system and be like, I want it to spawn this and this at this frame and with this vector of velocity or whatever it is. And some of them do less like scripting, similar scripting adjacent things. I think it's probably pretty similar across the board for effects artists. Like, you know, you have needs, you see needs, or you're given needs, you make the effects and help it get in the game. Not a super descriptive answer, but hopefully useful as far as other types of tech art, like shader work and like trippy shader work. We have like character artists, and they do a lot of like the bruises and stuff that appear on people and the cuts, and they'll like draw that art and hook it up in Surfer, which is our like thing our tool that handles things like shaders and textures. And some of the people are more on the art side, and they really just make it look pretty, and some of them are actually learning to be more techie and like actually scripting those things to happen at the right times. And some of them are like just effectively shader scripters, and they just create new tech that shaders can use and stuff. And is there another venue of tech art that I'm forgetting? Say again. Rigging. I knew I was forgetting something. So we have a foreground team. And I guess a character team, but our foreground people, we have background artists, we have a lot of those. And we have fewer foreground artists, and foreground is anything that moves, anything that's an object really, from a character to a, I don't know, grenade. And so if it's a character, then character like team makes it, and then they rig it. They work super closely with animators, with obvious reason. They'll also work with designers for like big set piece things that need to break up. So like in Scotland, there is in Scotland in Uncharted 4, not in real Scotland, as far as I know. There's this big like map room, and something goes wrong and something explodes and like rocks start falling from the ceiling and like breaking the ground, and turns out it's hollow under there and everything's like disintegrating and there's all these pieces exploding. That was me, animators and riggers working, or foreground people working closely together. And the foreground people also do modeling at Naughty Dog at least. And some of them do more rigging and some of them do more modeling. And they'll like, you know, do physics simulations sometimes to like figure out how things should break, and then to like make their own like physicsy looking animation. So it's the same every time, but it looks like physics. And they can like sim that out in Maya. I don't know what else to say about that. Is that a pretty good answer? Does that satisfy? Cool. Somewhere in the middle here. Yep.
Yeah. So the lockpicking mechanic, was that something that you pitched to like as we should do this feature, or was that something given to you?
Neither. That's something I made and then showed off. So that's one cool thing about Naughty Dog is if you can make an idea fast enough, you can just make, especially as a designer, and certainly you talk to everybody constantly. So I don't remember if I talked to somebody before doing it. Probably I did, right? Because like one of our designers, Amelia, she's super great, and she had this like learn to lockpick set that she lent me because I was thinking about making this. So I don't remember exactly how it broke down. Probably it was like thrown out as an idea, and I was like, that's neat, I want to do that. And they're like, okay, you can do that. That happens sometimes. Or I may have just had the idea like outside of a meeting space and been like, do you think it'd be cool if we like, you guys, does this seem like anybody else thinks this would be cool? Lockpicking, cool, I'm going to see if I can make it at all cool. And then I went and did it for a while and then showed people. Yeah, so, but also there's times, there's like, especially if you're doing puzzles in like an Uncharted game or puzzle design or that kind of a thing, it's oftentimes that like somebody will be given that category of thing to do. In Uncharted, it's really easy because we tend to break it down by levels. So like in Lost Legacy, who's played Lost Legacy? Cool. And who's played Uncharted 4? I will just reference Uncharted 4 because more people have played it. I'll just keep using Scotland because I know it best. In Scotland, there's this like puzzle where these big wheels that like move these crosses around. That was part of a level, and that was given to a person. They're like, we know we want a puzzle here, and we've got some like vague iconography, like we'd like it to be somehow vaguely referencing crosses and religion and Christianity. Super vague, like just use the icons. And then somebody came up with that super cool like pie sliced quadrant thing, but they came up with that because I think they were just given the task, put a puzzle here. I don't think they were given what puzzle or like how that should work. And that's how like the puzzles usually are given to a designer, and then that designer figures out what that means. But sometimes we'll like brainstorm a whole bunch of puzzle ideas and then figure out where to put them. But we'll like brainstorm them in a meeting together. This is a long answer, but good? More? Okay. There's someone back here who I've never gotten a question from, I see.
Yeah, sound design is my thing.
And what is your name?
Sound.
Are you serious? That's amazing.
What is your, like, you obviously have to work with them, but what do we do with ourselves, with any company?
How does sound design work in the wild? Yeah, so I didn't work with sound design like almost at all, if at all, at Tiburon, so I can't really speak to that. I just like wasn't on things where that was extra relevant, and like other people handled that. That's part of like the separation of powers and stuff that happens more. Versus at Naughty Dog, you own your area, and therefore you kind of have to touch and at least be aware of everything that's going on with it. So like I worked with sound designers on lockpicking, for instance, to come up with like what should the sounds be and how loud should they be, and so we have sound designers that are in-house. And again, this is like I can only really speak to Naughty Dog because that's all I really know about as far as this category. So we've got these sound designers in-house, and they all have these most of them have these like insulated quiet rooms where they can like tune things and make sounds and not bother anybody, but like listen to it with speakers instead of just headphones. And they have kind of this idea of a bunch of sound things that needs to happen, right? Oh, there are, in Lost Legacy, there are elephants. So they know they need to go figure out what elephants sound like, and what like an elephant footprint over stone versus mud sounds like, and in water, like what is a splashing effect? How is it different on a person foot versus an elephant foot, right, in water? And so on and so forth. And so a lot of the time they're doing things that are these big massive systemic things, or music or whatever. And they're hooking that stuff up themselves as well. They like know enough scripting, or they've got good scripting systems to set that up. Sometimes like a designer needs something specific. We're going to play the sound from script, and we ask for it, and they give it to us, and we go back and forth. We show them where it is, and they can mess with it if they want. And so I think it's a lot of recording and mixing is what the job looks like. I think they should always be part of the design process, because games that leave sound till late tend to suffer for it quite a bit, and games that bring it in really early tend to be inexplicably better. Like no one knows when sound is really great. No one realizes it unless they're a sound designer or like immersed in it. They just know everything feels right. And so as much as possible, so for things like systemic sounds, they're driving it. Right, they know these things exist in the world, and they're like, well, I know what that should sound like, and I know how to go get it and do my own Foley and stuff. And they go off and they do that stuff, and they go on trips sometimes to like for the elephants, they had to go get to some places where elephants are and record things about them. You can tell I'm a sound designer. Record things about them. So yeah, yes, they drive some things, and like everything else, at some point you're going to be given something to do, and at some point you're going to drive something that you know needs to be done or you want done. I've had people come to me about like, hey, you put this thing in and it has no sound. Were you thinking there should be sound? And I was like, yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about it yet. And they're like, cool, I'm going to go make sound for it because I want it. I'm like, thank you. I look forward to hearing it. And it's usually phenomenal. So, or it's always phenomenal. But does that answer your question? Okay, because I felt like I just said that they work. Like us all. Like us all. Yeah, I think as hopefully in any company you get to drive some of what you do, and inevitably at any company you get told what to do for certain things or requested to do certain things. But sound design is awesome. Don't neglect your sound designers, because they always get brought in too late, and it's not good. I saw another hand over there, and I see a hand here, and I saw a hand here. Have I called on you yet? Ever?
Yes, I asked you about water, but this one isn't about water.
Okay, go ahead.
When the EDA released Uncharted 4, I noticed on ArtStation that it wasn't a lot of prop models up there. It was mostly just technical stuff. How is your prop modeling handled? Because everyone's house is filled with stuff, but no one was really proud to show it off. Do you have modelers handing stuff off to texture artists? Is there more than one person on it?
Our foreground team, embedded within them are a lot of the people who do textures for the foreground objects. And at this point, things are going to get sounds like we're getting really, really specific to Naughty Dog's things, so we might want to ask some bigger questions or wrap up. But I will finish this one, which is, yes, you do lots of texture stuff, but you also model and you also rig. At Naughty Dog, our foreground team kind of does all of those things because they're all so related to each other. Does that answer your question? No. Talk to me more later, because it's a little bit hard to this is super specific, and there needs to be back and forth. So after. So
yes, and on that note, we do another class that's coming up.
Yes, and we have 3 minutes. So.
Yes. So if you have other questions for Daniel, he has agreed to hang out. You can come down and chat with Daniel. We thank him for giving his time. And so we'll go ahead and wrap up. Let's give Daniel a big hand for coming.
Thanks.